Above the Rim looks like a simple basketball movie, but what happened behind the camera is stranger than anything that made it to the screen. Get ready for 15 revelations that will completely change how you see this film forever. There is also one jaw-dropping bonus fact at the end that absolutely nobody talks about. This isn't just trivia, it's the messy, real story behind a cult classic that almost never got finished. So speed up with me, because the list starts right now. Number 1. Tupac, arrested twice above the rim, almost collapsed before it ever reached theaters. During the 6-week shoot in Harlem between October 18th and December 2nd, 1993, lead actor Tupac Shakur got arrested not once, but twice. On Halloween night in Atlanta, he stepped into a street confrontation after witnessing 2 men assaulting a driver. The men turned out to be off-duty officers carrying a stolen weapon, and gunfire ended the encounter with Tupac taking the fall. 18 days later, he was arrested again in New York City on a separate charge. Production shut down more than once, while the studio scrambled to figure out what to do with its most unpredictable star. Co-star Leon Robinson has said he found out about the Atlanta shooting from a newspaper, not from anyone on the crew. The production adapted by shooting around Tupac whenever he wasn't available, piecing together scenes out of sequence, and hoping the footage would cut together later. It is the kind of chaos that rarely survives in the final cut of a studio film, let alone becomes an open secret decades later. When Tupac did show up, though, everybody on set has said the same thing. The energy completely changed. Most productions would have simply recast the role after the first arrest, but this film couldn't afford to lose its lead, so the crew rearranged the entire shooting calendar around his availability instead. Number 2. A hidden body double. Some of the most memorable Tupac moments in this movie were not actually Tupac. In several scenes, including the film's climactic club sequence, editors used a lookalike stand-in and stitched the footage together with Tupac's existing shots. Actor Wood Harris confirmed the swap in a 2017 interview, explaining that when Tupac was unavailable for certain angles, the crew found a double and blended the takes in post-production. This kind of quiet substitution happens more often in Hollywood than audiences realize, but it rarely gets confirmed by someone who was actually there. The practice became almost necessary here, given how frequently the production lost access to its lead actor. In 2024, unseen mugshots from Tupac's November arrest even resurfaced online, showing a scar on his face that briefly confused fans until people realized it was simply movie makeup from the same shoot. Even the people who made the film sometimes had trouble telling the real Tupac from the stand-in, which says a lot about how tightly the editing team had to work under pressure to keep the production on schedule. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. The soundtrack outgrossed the movie. This film made real money, but its soundtrack made something closer to a fortune. Above the Rim earned $16.1 million at the box office, a solid number for a low-budget drama. The soundtrack, though, sold more than 2 million copies, going double platinum within 5 months of release. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200 and spent 10 straight weeks at number 1 on the R&B chart. The strangest part is where that soundtrack came from. This is a story set entirely in Harlem, filled with East Coast characters and East Coast slang. Yet the album was produced by Death Row Records, the most dominant West Coast label on the planet at the time. Suge Knight executive produced it, Dr. Dre supervised the sessions, and the track list featured Snoop Dogg, Thaw Dogg Pound, and a young pairing of Warren G and Nate Dogg. On paper, an East Coast movie with a West Coast soundtrack should have felt disjointed. Instead, it became one of the most beloved rap soundtracks of the decade, and it still gets ranked today alongside classic 90s movie soundtracks that somehow outlasted the films they were built to promote. Number 4. Regulate almost got cut. The biggest song on that soundtrack nearly never made it onto the album at all. Warren G had been developing Regulate for months and played it for his stepbrother, Dr. Dre, who was not impressed. Warren G has said he assumed the track was dead the moment Dre passed on it. Making things harder, Nate Dogg was signed to Death Row, while Warren G was signed to a different label entirely, which turned the collaboration into a legal headache. Interscope executive Jimmy Iovine pushed hard for the song to become the lead single, seeing potential that Dre had missed. Eventually, Suge Knight and Death Row cleared the paperwork, and the song made the cut. Warren G nearly missed his own music video shoot too, after driving off from a gas station with the fuel pump still attached to his car and getting arrested on outstanding warrants just hours before filming. The song went on to hit #2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of the defining songs of its entire era. 5. Wood Harris's first audition. One of the film's most menacing performances came from someone who had never acted professionally before. Wood Harris, who played the volatile enforcer Motaw, had never been in a movie prior to this one. Above the Rim was the very first project he ever auditioned for. At the time, he was a student at Northern Illinois University, playing college basketball while studying theater, and he knew the role's basketball requirement gave him a real advantage over other actors. Director Jeff Pollock offered him the part in the gym, but the job nearly cost Harris his education. He was simultaneously enrolled at NYU for a master's degree, and the shooting schedule wrecked his attendance so badly that the school expelled him for chronic tardiness. His classmates petitioned to get him reinstated, and it worked. 7 years later, Harris would land the role of a lifetime as Avon Barksdale on HBO's The Wire. But it all started with a basketball tryout, disguised as a callback. 6. The true story behind Kyle. This movie was never billed as a true story, but it was built from a real one. The concept originated with legendary manager Benny Medina, whose own life inspired the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Medina brought the idea to director Jeff Pollock, and the two brought it to screenwriter Barry Michael Cooper, who built the character of Kyle Lee Watson around a real all-American basketball prodigy from Queens, a kid with unlimited potential who nearly lost everything to the streets in the early 1980s. Cooper barely needed to research the world because he had lived it. Growing up in Harlem, he spent summers at the legendary Rucker Park tournament, watching NBA legends like Nate Archibald and Julius Erving play on the same blacktop, where local kids dreamed of getting discovered, and where plenty of talented players never made it out at all. Director Jeff Pollock flew to New York to see that world firsthand, attending real tournaments and taking notes before a single scene was filmed. When the crew finally shot the climactic tournament at Rucker Park itself, they weren't recreating the culture. They were filming inside of it, using the same bleachers, the same blacktop, and in some cases the same crowd that had shown up to Rucker Park for years before any camera ever arrived. 7. The actor who turned down the lead. The role of Kyle almost went to a much bigger name before it ever reached Dwayne Martin. Screenwriter Barry Michael Cooper had also written New Jack City, the film that made Alan Payne a star, and Cooper personally recommended Payne for the lead. Producers offered him the role. Payne turned it down, with no public explanation ever given. The part instead went to Dwayne Martin, who lacked Payne's name recognition, but brought something else entirely: real basketball experience, including an undrafted tryout with the New York Knicks before he ever pursued acting. Cooper has admitted he was disappointed when Payne passed, but he changed his mind completely once he saw the finished film. Sometimes the actor who says no accidentally hands the role to someone who fits it even better. Martin's basketball background ended up giving the film a physical authenticity that Payne, for all his star power, simply couldn't have replicated. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet, drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. 8. The cassette had songs the CD didn't. If you only ever owned the CD, you never heard the full soundtrack. The original cassette version of the album included 3 extra songs that never made it onto the compact disc, because CDs in 1994 maxed out at around 74 minutes, and the full album ran too long. Those cassette-only tracks became instant collector's items, including a song from Tupac that Dr. Dre initially rejected before an engineer convinced him to let it be recut and included. For years, fans hunted down old cassette copies just to hear the complete album the way it was originally sequenced. It's a strange kind of scarcity that barely exists anymore in the streaming era, where nothing gets left off a release for something as simple as running time. In 2021, Death Row Records finally reissued the soundtrack on cassette with every bonus track restored. 27 years after the movie came out, fans could finally hear the whole thing again. 9. A real streetball legend on screen, one actor in this film wasn't hired for his acting resume at all. Richard Pee Wee Kirkland was a genuine Harlem streetball legend who played at Rucker Park during its golden era, a man who chose the streets over a shot at the NBA and lived to tell about it. Director Jeff Pollack hired him as an on-set advisor, then put him directly in front of the camera as Phil Reddy, the Georgetown scout who spends the movie deciding Kyle's future. It's a small piece of casting that says a lot about how seriously the production treated authenticity. The tournament scenes were filmed at the actual Rucker Park court, a location with its own entry in New York City's historic park records. And Kirkland walked those grounds like he had earned every inch of them, because in a very real sense, he had. Every time that scout appears in the stands taking notes, you're watching a real piece of Harlem basketball history play a version of itself, a decision that added a layer of credibility no amount of set design or costume work could ever fake. Number 10. The comedian who proved he could act in 1994. This actor was still known strictly as a stand-up comedian, and nobody expected what he did next. Bernie Mac played Flip Johnson, a homeless former high school basketball star now battling addiction, a role with almost nothing funny about it. Britannica later described the performance as an acclaimed dramatic turn, and it proved Mac could disappear into a character rather than simply deliver punchlines. His scenes carry real emotional weight, and his character's death becomes a genuine turning point in the story. Mac would go on to steal scenes in Friday the following year, then land roles in The Players Club and Ocean's 11, before earning 2 Emmy nominations for his own sitcom. He died in 2008 from complications related to pneumonia at just 50 years old. But before any of that fame arrived, Bernie Mac played a heartbroken addict in a basketball movie and made audiences feel every bit of it. Number 11. Tupac kept the crowd loose. The packed crowds in the basketball scenes weren't just background extras standing around. Co-star Leon Robinson has confirmed that during the tournament scenes, Tupac walked through the crowd of hundreds of extras handing out marijuana, treating it almost like party favors to keep the atmosphere loose and authentic. Castmate Marlon Wayans has described similar marathon sessions on set. Whatever was happening in Tupac's personal life at the time, and there was plenty happening, cast members consistently say he locked in the moment cameras started rolling. Entertainment Weekly's 1994 review even called him the most dynamic young actor since Sean Penn, while noting the jury was still out on whether he'd prove just as self-destructive off-screen, a line that reads very differently in hindsight. Whatever kept the extras relaxed clearly worked, because the crowd energy in this film still feels completely real decades later. Number 12. A hotel lobby almost turned violent. The writer and director of this movie respected each other, but that didn't stop them from nearly coming to blows. Barry Michael Cooper had rewritten some of Kyle's dialogue to sound more authentically Harlem, and director Jeff Pollack didn't like it. The confrontation happened in a hotel lobby, with Pollack accusing Cooper of changing the script without approval, and tension escalating to the point where it looked like things might turn physical. Cooper stood his ground, reportedly reminding Pollack that the whole reason he'd been hired was to keep the film authentic to Harlem rather than softened for a wider audience. Pollack eventually backed down, and by Cooper's own account, the two talked it out, and Pollack came to respect the commitment to accuracy. The dialogue stayed exactly as Cooper wrote it, and the film is arguably better for the argument that almost got physical over it, a reminder that some of the most authentic details in a movie survive because someone was willing to fight for them behind the scenes. Number 13. The actor who lived this story. One member of this cast wasn't just performing a basketball dream, he had actually lived it. Dwayne Martin graduated from NYU in 1989 after playing college basketball there, then signed with the New York Knicks as an undrafted free agent that same year on a non-guaranteed contract. He was cut before the season even started and never played in an official NBA game. Instead of walking away from the sport entirely, Martin pivoted straight into acting, eventually landing a role in White Men Can't Jump that leaned directly on his real basketball experience. By the time Above the Rim came out, Martin was 28 years old, playing a teenage phenom chasing the exact dream he had personally lost just a few years earlier. It's rare for a performance to be built on such a direct mirror of the actor's own disappointment, but that's exactly what makes his role feel so lived in, and it's part of why audiences at the time found his performance so much more convincing than a typical Hollywood casting choice would have been. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations, and tell me in the comments, Do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 14, the last time audiences saw him alive. Nobody watching this movie in theaters realized they were witnessing something they'd never get to see again. Above the Rim hit theaters on March 23, 1994, when Tupac Shakur was just 22 years old. 2.5 years later, he was gone, killed in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas on September 7, 1996. Every other film he appears in was released after his death. Co-star David Bailey, who played Coach Rollins, worked closely with Tupac throughout the shoot and later called him one of the greatest actors he ever worked with, comparing him to Brando for his ability to channel real-life chaos directly into a performance. That's an enormous compliment for someone who had only been acting professionally for about 3 years at that point. This remains the last time audiences ever saw Tupac on screen while he was still alive, which retroactively turns an ordinary theatrical release into one of the more haunting footnotes in 90s film history. Almost at the end, and the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Number 15, the director's unexplained death. The man who directed this film never got to see how much its legacy would grow. Above the Rim was Jeff Pollock's directorial debut, made when he was just 34 years old, and he went on to direct Booty Call and Lost and Found afterward. In December 2013, he was found dead on a jogging path near Manhattan Beach in Los Angeles at 54 years old, with no cause of death immediately released and the circumstances remaining vague. Screenwriter Barry Michael Cooper wrote a tribute essay a few months later on the film's 20th anniversary, honoring everyone connected to the production who had already passed away by that point, including Pollock, Tupac, Bernie Mac, and David Bailey. An entire generation of people who helped build this cult classic didn't live to see how much people still talk about it, which makes revisiting the film today feel a little different than it did on opening weekend in 1994. Bonus: the scene nobody can explain. There's one moment in this film that even the person who wrote every other scene cannot account for. Screenwriter Barry Michael Cooper knows every line and every character motivation in Above the Rim, except for a single strange scene where one character watches another using an alleyway overpass, a moment that feels completely out of step with everything around it. In his own tribute essay, Cooper stated flatly that he never wrote it and never even thought of it. Someone added it during production without ever consulting him, and decades later, he still has no explanation for why it exists or who put it there. Nobody has ever claimed credit for writing it. It remains a tiny, unresolved mystery buried inside a movie that most people assume they fully understand. Above the Rim made $16 million at the box office and sold 2 million soundtrack copies, but almost everyone who built it, the director, the star, and several co-stars, is gone now. What remains is 96 minutes of Harlem basketball, street dreams, and impossible choices. A time capsule from 1994 that still hits just as hard today. Propped up by a soundtrack nobody expected to work, a cast full of future legends nobody had discovered yet, and a mystery scene nobody has ever solved. And those were 15 strange facts about Above the Rim. This movie matters more than people give it credit for, because it captured a moment in music and film history that can never be repeated. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and comment which fact surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves a list of strange facts. See you in the next video.